I can recollect only a varied gallery of vague images and remembrances as I was removed from the vehicle and half carried up the seemingly endless stairs to my apartment. There were voices, but what words were spoken had no feasibility as I was brought into the warm, welcome light of my home. The 3 Stoneland members were still there, sitting in chairs around the John circle in which Tullinarsus still hovered. However, as soon as he entered, the entire energy of the room shifted. Teals almost dropped to the chair, so quickly did he descend, but still did not awaken. The society women stared at Spider with the most intense combinations of curiosity and concern I had ever seen. Then their eyes left him and found me with a strange sort of shocked, compassionate horror. Kastja, in particular, stood and stared ice-cold daggers at me, as if I were a drunken husband carried home to his spouse. "What have you done?" I heard a woman's voice say, as my eyes were closed, and I could not determine which it was. Even in my state, I found those words disquieting, as I may have expected. Is he all right, or perhaps even what happened, with some degree of concern. Instead, there was an immediate sense of judgment here, and yet Spider was very worried and rallied to my defense. "He saved us in the alley," he explained, with no small degree of insulted pride. "Did he now?" came Kastja, crossing the room and standing over me, after I was laying on my dusty blanket-covered sofa, her expression one of the most intense scrutiny. She even seemed to sniff the air around me until she shared knowing looks with Lemora and Lynn. They soon, however, switched their attention back to Spider, who had noticed Tills and had begun to approach the circle, when Lynn approached and very gently held him back as if he were a delicate item to be handled with care. "What is wrong with him?" the boy asked, with the same concerned tone. There was something about him standing here now with Patrick and Tills that held a sense of completion. If I had been well, I would have been transfixed and fascinated by this meeting, but the heavy, dreary, tired waves of sorrow washed over me again and again. It was more than just weariness. I felt like a lamp that burned out all of its oil, and all that remained was a single glowing coal on its wick, slowly blackening and cooling. That was me. That was all my light. But I desperately wanted to continue to see how this would evolve. These 3 that had somehow become entangled by fate. "What of Antoine? What of Fisher?" came Lynn's broken, emotion-filled voice, her hands clasped together tightly as she stared at me, desperately wanting for news. Her concern for Fisher went well beyond that of the others, and that was saying much, as everyone in the society seemed to love and revere Mr. Fisher. "Do you know Mr. Fisher, then?" Spider asked innocently with a surprised smile. He seemed delighted to meet others within his circle. Yes, have you seen him?" Lynn said, almost leaping on the boy, her hand clasping the dirty sleeve of his shirt. "Miss Marin," I managed to croak. "We did indeed find him," her eyes tearful, but alight with hope. Was he? "He was, and I believe he is, alive," I answered, and she looked quickly to Spider. "We got them out, ma'am," the boy offered proudly. "Eldon and I cut them loose." All noticed that he spoke of Fisher in the plural. Everyone in the room stared in silence, as one could almost hear the group's separate breaths. "Then, you know then," Lynn said to me. "Somewhat," I coughed, and struggled against the exhaustion and depressed energy of my mind. "I have an idea," but there is much to be explained. It was my turn to cast a suspicious eye on them as they shared looks. Patrick had remained silent, but he studied every face, and I knew by now that he was recording and delving into each individual's presence. I had by now guessed that Tilonassus was not the only member of the Watch who carried a secret talent. Tills had remarked from the beginning how Pat seemed to pull thoughts from his mind, even when he could not focus them. It often seemed that Patrick was hearing more than what was being said. Finally, he broke the silence. "Is Mr. Fisher the one who committed the murders?" Spider looked at her and instinctively realized that an accurate description might break the woman down horribly. "Pretty bad, but Charlotte said she knew how to help him. She said she wouldn't let him go. She was very angry at what they did." "What did they do?" Patrick standing, still pulling tobacco from his belt. They made him fight in the pit," I coughed, and he paused, licking his rolling paper. Lynn began to sob, while Kostya and Lemora became visibly distressed. "It's all right, lady," Spider offered with a smile. "They won every fight." Patrick stood frozen with wonder, looking at me for understanding. "Shala is an insanely skilled fighter," I explained. "And who is Shala?" he asked. She's the Flayer," Spider answered, and Patrick seemed to be anxiously trying to understand. I knew that it was that he wanted to be told that Fisher was not the killer. Sadly, I knew it would not be that simple. "Fisher is two people," I told him. "There's a spirit within him, in a way similar to how the priestess is within Tills." "It is not the same," Kostya said with a note of defiance. "Shala has been a part of Fisher for a very long time. Most of his life," Lynn spoke softly, "since he was a child." "But why?" Patrick said in honest wonder. "Why are they killing people?" "They are fighting a war," Spider answered. "But Shala doesn't really like humans that much anyway." "Humans?" Patrick struck a match. "Shala is, or was, an elf." "A real elf," I interjected. "Like a hundreds-of-year-old elf spirit from the Dark Tales or something." Lemora nodded her agreement. "She is an ancient and powerful spirit." "She's trying to save the children," Spider answered. Patrick blew smoke out of his nose and sighed. "Can we please get Tills back, and then maybe we can talk?" The group all nodded their agreement, and I watched as the society women gathered around Spider and pointed towards the circle where Tills lay slumped in the chair. Patrick came and helped me up, and I watched the boy move closer, and Tills began to twitch and move. His eyes were opening, and his mouth agape. Tears began to run from his eyes. "He's here," Lemora said, offering Spider to his view. It is him," came Till's voice, but with a strange lilt. Then, with a blinding burst of hazy light, I could see the transparent form of the ghost emerge from Tills and assimilate into a semi-corporeal form, pressed against the edge of the circle, as if looking out a window glass. "Sebastian," she said. Spider seemed confused, but there was a dawning realization as he studied the ghost, and came closer without fear. He knew her. He recognized her. I know you. I've seen you in my memories," he whispered. "You are Sister Anestis." She pressed closer. as if she would break the circle to get to him, but it held her. "Can you remember?" she said, the light of her spectral glow reflected in his dark eyes. You took care of me. You were like my mom," he whispered, as if he would weep. "But I hurt you. I never wanted." I know. It wasn't your fault, Sebastian." "What do you want?" Lemora said to the spirit. "What would you like to do?" "I want to be with him," she answered. "Let me be with my boy." "She wants to join with you, Spider," Lemora explained. "Will you accept her?" Tears had begun to flow down his eyes as he sobbed. Please let her out." And with the most casual gesture, Lemora touched the circle with her foot and scratched a line through the chalk from the ghost to the boy. We watched as it exited like a whirl of glowing smoke that enwrapped and encircled Spider. But he was not frightened. He was smiling as she contained him. "I remember," he said finally. "I remember her now." "What are we to do now?" Lemora said to the other two women, who now sat together drinking my wine at a table in the space which I designated my dining room. I was sitting dazedly in recovery from my adventure, playing slowly at my harpsichord with Sebastian, sitting at my side, listening with amazement. He grew irritated with me when I paused or forgot notes, so enwrapped was he in listening. Patrick stalked about the room nervously, as Tills lay exhausted in my bed, bouncing in and out of sleep. "We must notify the society that Fisher is alive, but that Shala is dominant, and they are loose somewhere." Cassia spoke with a resolve which was admirable. Lynn had gone quite dark with her worry, and seemed to be having a troubling dialogue within her mind. She often fell silent and clasped her hands in prayer. It was now obvious that she cared a great deal for Fisher in a way which was not apparent in the others. "Are any of you going to explain this?" Patrick burst forth with complete frustration. "Do you not think that we deserve some explanation? If you wish us to aid you, you must tell me what this is. Who is this Shala? Who is Fisher, for that matter? Why, in all the high spirits, is this being skinning people of the city? What war is she fighting? What did these people do to deserve this death? I want to understand. And I would like to help, but I cannot help a murderer." "Do not say that!" Lynn snapped from her prayer, pointing at Patrick furiously as she had every time he had introduced this topic. "Then tell me what is happening," Patrick returned, this time determined to not let this go as he had for hours. "Evil, sick men," Cassia commented casually. "That is what Shala is hunting. Fisher is, or was, a police detective investigator from High Ground," Lemora added. "It is a city in the east which sits near the lake known as Valjamwal," Cassia continued. "They all haunted a demon lake from stories?" I asked, looking up. "Yes, it is known as the Demon Lake. Lynn said, relaxing a bit as she accepted that this knowledge would be shared. There are stories about it in the Dark Tales book, I commented as I began to play again. I grew up with Fisher in an orphanage, Lynn explained as she began to summon strength with the telling. It was a temple orphanage of the Three Sisters. Fisher was never adopted because he was so different. Ironic, isn't it? Kostya said, sipping her wine thoughtfully. In a land where old elf blood is considered nobility, a person with elf blood is rejected by society. It's because he shows the blood of the river elves, Leymora explained. The fisher elves were looked down on by the other societies of elves. They were considered simple and primitive. They lived in huts and tree houses over the river. They were tribal, I think. I tried to remember what I had read of them. But they had a very feral appearance. They had great eyes, green skin, and sharp pointed teeth. They were not savages, Kostya sighed. They just believed in living close to nature like all the other elves, except in practice they were much more devoted. They had complex spirituality and philosophy like all elves. They just loved the waters passionately. They did not believe in civilization, Lynn said, smiling sadly, and so they were looked down on by the other elves, and that stigma continued to the day when Fisher was found. So he was never adopted. He was treated horribly as a child. So the priestesses of the temple raised him as a member and servant of the temple. And I joined the priesthood when I was a young girl. Fisher and I grew up together. He is like she paused, a brother to me. But when did this Flayer become a part of this story? Patrick approached them slowly and without threat. I could tell he was doing the thing which Tills always called his caring interrogation. His eyes had become soft and sympathetic, and his body relaxed and humbled in movement. I had yet to be able to tell whether this was simply an action, or if he was truly summoning some deep compassion, which showed in his manner. At some point when he was a child, he was given the dagger, Lynn said, her eyes now in shadow. Shala, the Flayer, was in the dagger. She became a part of him, and has been so for all of his life since. But Antoine was given and accepted the dagger and Shala as a gift. She gave him great strength. She views him as her family, or as her pet, Kostya stated flatly. Maybe, Lynn said thoughtfully, but she would never bring him to harm. Then, what is this? Patrick waited patiently. Disappearances, Kostya said, meeting his gaze. Men, women, and children had begun to vanish all over high ground, with no trace, and Fisher was seeking the cause. That was how we met them, Leymora said, touching Lynn's shoulder affectionately. The city had called the Stoneland Society to help Detective Fisher find out what was happening to the missing people. And did you? Patrick was gobsmacked. We did, Lynn answered solemnly. And that was when Shala went to war.